Hello and welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is American Ben. Friends, Wookiees, keyboard Jedi, lend me your ears. I come to bury Anakin, not to praise him. Nor do I come to make a mockery of the history of the galaxy. I would be remiss if I appeared before you today to argue the cause of all the strife and everything gone wrong in society is due but in large to the mistakes and malevolence of the Jedi. As with anything in reality, outcomes and actions are built upon the succession and combination of many factors, all of which can be interpreted as both the product of free will or belonging to more deterministic principles. Except for my messy unkempt hair, of course, that can only be accepted as the product of some immutable deterministic value to the material world that no comb or brush might hope to alter. But I digress. I come to you today not to neglect the dark side's place in advancing the injustices performed by its own adherents. I acknowledge the fact must in some way be true and weigh heavily. However, I come in Socratic humility to chat with friends and ask questions, while qualifying that I do not pretend to know, only desire to suppose. For where we might rather easily accept the Sith's responsibility for the fall of Anakin to the dark side, less do we consider the actions of the Jedi in contribution to this fact. Thus, my inquiry forms from the following command of Obi-Wan to Anakin.
The Council wants you to report on all the Chancellor's dealings. They want to know what he's up to.
The Jedi's request of Anakin that he spy on the Chancellor of the Republic, the Holy One Sheev Palpatine, I suggest might be the Jedi's most egregious error in the larger event of Anakin's treachery. But prior to qualifying this claim, I suppose I should acknowledge some context as I alluded to just earlier. I do not intend to suggest that the order given to spy on Palpatine started Anakin upon some new trend. On the contrary, and as is quite obvious, Anakin's path to the dark side began well before the Jedi even conceptualized the need to make such a request. His slaughter of the Tusken Raiders at the site of his mother's torture and death was an acquiescence to anger. The Jedi, by their code, do not submit to emotions as Sith so willingly do, and even in the face of suffering, detach themselves and abide by their fundamental principles. Anakin, by his very nature, and perhaps so too the nurture of his chaotic childhood, was probably predisposed to the dark side. Before the Jedi asked him to spy, so too did he betray the Jedi Code and slay Count Dooku. And when informed of Palpatine's forthcoming usurpation of universal power, Anakin seemed little bothered.
The Senate is expected to vote more executive powers to the Chancellor today.
Well, that can only mean less deliberating and more action. Is that bad?
I also do not pretend by impugning the Jedi for their enlisting of Anakin as a spy to minimize the depravity of Anakin's actions following his fall, such as his massacre of the Jedi younglings.
There are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Though to be fair to Anakin, I did hear from some of the mothers around the Republic that this particular group of younglings was frustratingly disobedient and often refused to be good little child soldiers. I suppose, though, that Anakin's other contributions to Order 66 are somewhat harder to defend as the mere outburst of a disaffected youth from troubled beginnings. I'm no genocide apologist. I don't even like the NBA. Yes, Anakin was perhaps destined for the dark side, and yet I still question whether the Jedi deserve a share of the blame for his betrayal due to their desire that he spy on Palpatine. So now let's investigate that action itself. Anakin's immediate reaction to the request was as follows.
They want me to spy on the Chancellor. That's treason.
We are at war, Anakin.
Anakin saw spying on the Chancellor as being in conflict with the Jedi Code, which is centered on the following mantra. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. Without a full understanding of the various bylaws of this code, generally speaking, treason can be interpreted as a violation of it, in that in this case it is the product of attachment to power, which itself is derived from fear, an emotion. Here we might say the Jedi's fear that Palpatine might betray the Republic and subvert their power incited their own motivation to betray the Chancellor. Taken in its most absolute form, the Jedi Code does not condone the violation of principle for the sake of attachment to material elements.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
And as selfless as the reasoning for the Jedi's action might have been in reality, Anakin interpreted spying at the behest of the Jedi to be an attachment to power in the aforementioned way. And Palpatine was thus able to seize upon this interpretation.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it, even the Jedi.
The Jedi's action didn't make Palpatine a Sith. but it did provide a platform for him to draw moral equivalency between the light and dark for presentation to Anakin.
Good as a point of view, Anakin. The Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way.
Anakin indeed was on a determined approach to the dark side prior to the Jedi entreating him to spy, and yet still I wonder if his arrival at Sithdom was in all ways inevitable. Anakin Skywalker, until that moment of his conversion, was a deeply tortured soul, teetering on the edge of dark rather than in free fall towards it. For instance, his conscience caused his mind labor following the execution of Dooku.
He was too dangerous to be kept alive.
Yes, but he was an unarmed prisoner. I shouldn't have done that. It's not the Jedi way.
Anakin's young mind was not committed unequivocally to the Jedi, but in their code he found an intellectual and spiritual attraction. When the Jedi themselves violated this code, it compromised Anakin's vision of the Jedi as pious devotees of it.
Sometimes I wonder what's happening to the Jedi Order. I think this war is destroying the principles of the Republic.
Thus, we have a conundrum in the relationship between power and ethics. Remaining totally beholden to the Jedi Code might mean the annihilation of the Jedi as the result of the principles of the Code itself.
To answer power with power. The Jedi way, this is not. In this war, a danger there is of losing who we are.
The Jedi preach restraint even amidst injustice, that the Force shan't be perverted, as it is on the dark side, for the sake of survival. And yet a violation of the code compromises its very truth, and though the result of such infringement might purpose victory, the triumphant shall emerge upon a republic that does not reflect or uphold the very values they intended to propagate. So we arrive at a choice between allowing society to crumble with its value system intact, or persist with its principles irrevocably altered. And this choice is the central idea that we're focusing on in this video, and I'd like you to grapple with it in the comments down below. The Jedi chose to betray their code, and in doing so put the commitment of an irresolute but impressionable adherent in jeopardy, especially as the enemies of the Jedi applied poison into the wound opened by dereliction of the code.
The Jedi Council want control of the Republic. They're planning to betray me.
The violation of one's ethics is especially self-threatening when performed by the just, for the honorable will not pursue methods of repair that would be considered unnatural, whereas the unjust are content to co-opt the principles of the just and claim them as their own.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling. I love democracy. I love the Republic.
And there is further danger as well to the Jedi betraying their principles. For in doing so and allowing that the conflicted adherent augment his ambivalence and become neutral between the light and the dark, the Jedi have only the tools of the just to win back their disciple.
Anakin, I'm appointing you to be my personal representative on the Jedi Council.
This offer of power to Anakin was of course made before the Jedi's direction to him that he spy. But after the fact, with in his perspective now both the light and the dark being equal in their values or lack of them, the offerings of the dark side make the path of the Sith all the more attractive and almost impossible to resist.
Learn to know the dark side of the Force, and you will be able to save your wife from certain death.
Even with an unbroken ethic, the just are acutely disadvantaged in conflict with the unjust, the charge upon them an extraordinary burden. Remain principled while thy enemy cheats. The just cannot afford the slightest infraction against their creed, lest the unjust should prosper upon it. And I suppose that we thus understand the weight of the Jedi's task, as it is but impractical to expect infallibility of any organic being, nor an entity composed of them. Now I expect that some might protest that adherence to the Jedi Code should not serve the unjust. And these same objectors would even further scoff at the notion that the Jedi should not make exception to their credo in the case of a Sith Lord such as Palpatine. And yet to that I offer, in somewhat repeating myself, that even a slight transgression against a set of principles on the part of its defenders may beget a lasting subversion of its integrity that shall promise in the practice of moral suspension undertaken for attack on one's enemies, that none, not even the arbiters of the principles themselves, shall partake in the advantages such principles commit to provide, and on the contrary, make these arbiters eventually subject to the consequences inspired by the temporary abdication they so enthusiastically justified. I believe it was some Jedi elder who once said, quote, He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression, for if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself." End quote. The proper inference here, of course, is that you must protect those rights of your enemy that you would see perpetuated for your own interest. The Jedi, in demanding Anakin betray the Jedi Code and spy on Palpatine, violated this wisdom and thus invited the fall of their prodigy and still too, the dissolution of the Republic, or perhaps indeed its continuation, but under the value system they inspired by their violation.
The Imperial Senate will no longer be of any concern to us. I have just received word that the Emperor has dissolved the Council permanently. The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
Had the Jedi remained true to their values, perhaps Anakin would have had no final cause to embrace the dark side in full. The Jedi Elder mentioned before might argue that the defense of principle in the name of one's allies requires a pittance of valiance, where upholding the same at the side of an enemy demands virtue of the highest order. But then again, what virtue is there in allowing society to fall altogether? Once again, the paradox we must debate in the comments below. If you do not believe in a given system, then of course I do not suggest you abide by it absolutely. And if a given system should put your life in danger against your will, you'd be wise to question whether it was well constructed at its point of origin. The Jedi's command of Anakin to spy was an exercise in celebrating the Jedi Code in name while disrupting it in action. A signal of virtue intended to conceal sin, worthy of the Greek character Adamantus, who in Plato's Republic spoke the words to Socrates, quote, "Can I by justice or by crooked ways of deceit ascend a loftier tower which may be a fortress to me all my days? For what men say is that, if I am really just, and am not also thought just, profit there is none. But the pain and loss on the other hand are unmistakable. But if, though unjust, I acquire the reputation of justice, a heavenly life is promised to me. Since then, as philosophers prove, appearance tyrannizes over truth and is lord of happiness, to appearance I must devote myself." End quote. Practice with absoluteness only the principles of that system you wish to live within. And if you should violate its order to maintain it, then the system shall become perverted. I suggest in closing then, tread lightly in compromising the values you espouse.